Welcome to The Point of View. This is your favorite current affairs show on television. On The Point of View, we pick the right topics, we get the right guests, and ask them relevant questions on issues that matter to you. And there's a big story in Ghana, the opening of the spillways of the Akosombo and the dams, the aftermath resulting in flooding for at least 8 constituencies, resulting in the displacement of now 30,000 people. I have a big panel tonight. What we're doing is to bring you insights into the development from 5 perspectives. We'll look at this from a historical perspective. We'll look at this from a hydrological engineering perspective. We'll look at this from the legal perspective, a global perspective, and also the future. A huge panel to come. Stay with us.
Intestinal worms may cause itching, abdominal pains, loss of appetite, and anemia. Intestinal worms may enter the body through improperly cooked foods, dust, or contaminated soils. Wormplex 400 is an effective dewormer for both adults and children and can be taken at any time of the day. It is recommended to deworm periodically. 1 tablet of Wormplex 400 kills intestinal worms, roundworms, hookworms, tapeworms, and other intestinal worms. I recommend Wormplex 400 to you because it has worked for my family. Lactating mothers, pregnant women, and children under 2 years should consult their physician before taking Wormplex 400. Wormplex 400 as soon harmful. This advert is FDA approved.
Welcome back. So there's a huge story in Ghana. The Akosombo Dam has had water levels rising. The last time we checked, the level was at 277.32 feet. The maximum operable level for the dam is 277.50. So basically, we are less than 0.20 feet from the dam maxing out. The Water River Authority has been managing the spill. Managing is a very loose term. They've been spilling water to avoid the destruction of the dam. They've opened 8 out of 12 spillways. The Dam, which is downstream, has also opened about 12 out of 14 spillways, with almost 200,000 cubic feet per second of water being spilled. This has led to devastating floods from Esuojaman in the eastern region, through Shai Osudoku in the Greater Accra region, all the way to Ada downstream. 8 or 9 constituencies affected by this. We also have communities upstream like Setredumasi and all the way at Buipe complaining of flooding because as the water level rises, they are all affected. So how did we get here? Did the people who put the dam in place anticipate this? What protocols were put in place to work around these matters? I have a panel I'm going to talk to you shortly about. Professor Judy Chikata is joining us. She is a social scientist, right? She used to head the Institute of African Studies. She was also at ISE. She's now a research professor at the SOAS, School of Oriental and African Studies in the UK. But for this show, she's also the author of this book. This, I think, is the authority on this subject at the moment. This book, Living in the Shadow of the Large Dams, Long-Term Responses of Downstream Lakeside Communities of Ghana's Volta River Project. It has everything you need to know about the subject. She's joining us digitally. Prof, thanks for joining us. Good evening.
Thank you very much for having me on the show.
My pleasure. We also have a legal angle to the matter. Clement Kojo Akapam is a law lecturer at GIMPA, but is also the country principal for Client Earth, who are very concerned about natural resource management and governance. So they are legal people who understand the way natural resources must be governed. Clement, thanks for joining us. Good evening.
Thank you, Bernard.
I will be joined by Engineer Wise Ametepe. He is the immediate past General Secretary of the Engineering Council, a hydrological engineer by training. He will join us to bring an engineering perspective. So Prof, since you have, I think, the book that we've all had to read in the past 2 weeks, your general thoughts on what's happening. What do you make of this? Being somebody who's researched this, predicted, prescribed, how surprised are you at what's happening in Ghana in relation to the spillage and the devastation we're seeing?
Thank you very much for your question. First of all, I want to send my deepest commiserations to all those who've been affected by the spillage of the Volta dams, particularly the communities in the upstream around the lake, but especially in the lower Volta. And as you point out, it's all the way from Sojaman to Adan towards Keta. These are compatriots who are really in distress at this time. So I want to express my commiserations to them. Now, you asked me how shocked I was by the magnitude of the flooding. I think the magnitude of the flooding has been shocking to all of us. It is not because these areas have not been flooded before. You may recall that spills have been occurring. The Water River Project, the VRA, has been spilling water periodically since 1966 when the dam the Akosombo Dam was constructed. In fact, the very first floods, the big floods, came when the lake was forming, and many communities were submerged, and 90,000 people at least had to be resettled. Many more left, and others settled around the lake. So the last time we saw this magnitude of flooding probably was in the mid-1960s, and it caused a lot of suffering from which some communities have never recovered. So this is a very serious situation, and the enormity of the situation will come to hit us not just in the short term, but in the medium and in the long term.
Wonderful. So if 1960s was the latest in terms of the magnitude, that's interesting, because when I interviewed the VRA's deputy CEO, he said to me that in 2010-ish, they did do some spilling, but it didn't become a national catastrophe like the way this has become. So I'm not sure if it's because it's rainier now. Of course, he did say that at the time it was drier weather. Do you suppose that the VRA have some protocols they ought to go through, and they could have prevented this based on the way they are supposed to work? Because if in 2010 they did spill possibly the same volumes, and yet it didn't lead to the same level of devastation, does the VRA have questions to answer from what you know about how they work?
I definitely think the VRA has questions to answer. The Volta River Project, as you know, was initially envisaged as a multi-purpose dam. So to produce hydropower, make possible irrigation of the Accra Plains, manage the Volta to control floods, ironically. This was actually one of the aims and objectives of damming the Volta. It was to produce resources for tourism and water sports, transportation, industries, particularly fishing and agro-processing industries. By the time the dam came to be built, the financing arrangements had converted it into a hydropower dam with a sole focus on producing power and distributing it mainly to an aluminium smelter, but also a few domestic consumers. More recently, it acquired a grid company and expanded the distribution of power to other resources, and has also been trying to develop other power sources with investments also in non-power businesses like hospitality, education, and dams. Because of this legacy, the VRA has been very poor at managing the Volta in a way that takes full cognizance of the interests of the people in the Volta River Basin. In fact, I've been thinking that maybe the VRA should change its name from the Volta River Authority to become the Volta Dams Authority, because that seems to be its main focus. And this tunnel vision has become narrower and narrower as the years have gone by, and as the VRA itself has begun to face challenges. So this very competent organization has never had the full view of the Volta Basin whenever it's taken actions. It has always first protected the dam, done everything it can to protect the dam, and then looked around to see what the results are. And basically, each time it can have a whole load of excuses. So for example, in this period, I hear a lot of discussions about acts of God, force majeure, and that kind of thing. I think this is a back-passing exercise. It's too quick. First of all, we have to interrogate the Volta River Authority's processes and their protocols. They said they had an environmental protocol, they had a disaster management protocol, and so on. Nobody's interrogating how good these are, and also how clearly these activities take into account the economies of the Volta Basin, because it's not just people who've been flooded out. This is a distraction of local economies, which are likely to affect Ghana's GDP. And so we really have to be slow about claiming that this is about God. Of course, there's climate change. Managing floods is not an exact science, but my question is this: is the VRA actually equipped to have the kind of vision that allows it to manage the dam while also keeping local communities and dam-affected communities safe and sound and able to go about their businesses and able to invest and grow their investments over a long period of time without these regular floods that keep on destroying the local economies?
Prof, I had a map of the Volta system showing the drainage basin, and I will hopefully put it on the screen. When I put that map up, it goes all the way into almost Mali because I'm seeing on that map the Black Volta, which sources from Ivory Coast into Burkina. There's a river called the Soro. Then there's the White Volta, there's the Red Volta, then there's the Oti. That whole system, this is on the screen. Now,
Yeah.
are you suggesting that the VRA should be working like the Volta Basin Authority with knowledge and insight around what happens from the source point and not simply managing a dam to produce power? Should that be our understanding of what you're trying to say about this situation?
No, not quite.
Okay.
So the Volta rises from the Futajalon Mountains
Yes.
in Mali. There is a Volta Basin Authority, which
Okay.
is made up of all the countries, about 9 of them,
Okay.
who have anything to do with the Volta.
Okay.
And if that system is working well, we should be managing the Volta in a way that gives us more information about what's happening in the Futajalon Mountains, what may be happening in Burkina Faso, what may be happening in other parts of the basin. So it is not VRA's sole responsibility to manage the entire Volta Basin. But I'm saying that it is their responsibility to manage the Ghana part of the Volta Basin and not simply see themselves as the authority established to produce power, because you cannot produce power without the dams. And if you interdict a river, then you are responsible for everything that you do with this interdiction. So when you have a lake to manage, another question I would like to ask is that how well is the VRA managing that reservoir? People may not understand, but the Akosombo Dam is an old dam, and at 50 years old, I don't know how many years it still has to be viable. How silted is it as a reservoir? How is the VRA managing that reservoir to make sure that the silting is not compromising the amount of water that can be stored in it. So those are the kinds of things I'm talking about.
Thank you.
But yeah.
I'll come back to you. Let me come to Engineer Wise Ametefe, who is a hydrological engineer, Engineering Council. Let's deal with the engineering of this, right? So she's given us the history and the broad strokes. Is what is happening an engineering failure of any kind at all?
Well, what is happening, good afternoon.
Yeah.
What is happening is not an engineering failure. It's a lack of coordination among agencies, or let's say countries within the Volta Basin. That is what is happening. Because, as she rightly said, information must be passed on from one part to the other. And Volta River Authority happens to be at the receiving end, the last end of the whole basin. So whatever takes place in other parts of the upstream parts of the river affects us here. So I think it's an engineering, but it's purely a hydrological issue. What is happening is purely hydrological. Yeah.
Where hydrological means what?
Taking the river sources from within the basin, the management of the river sources within the basin. Yeah, that is what I'm saying.
Great. Now, I've heard people say that the way the dam is designed is part of the problem. People have said, for example, that having just 2 dams on that stretch could be part of the problem. Some have said there are dredges that ought to have been done further south as part of the problem. Just walk me through your own thoughts around whether those comments are viable in the context of what's happening.
With respect to the dam, the way the dam has been designed, actually, I have a problem with the way the dam has been designed. With respect to the height, it appears to be too high, thereby trapping a lot of area, catching a lot of water. You see, it could have been made lower and have 1 or 2 more. Like you have them
spread, make it wider instead of higher.
Yeah, this is too high. It's very high. You see, higher means if there's even a fault at Akosombo, the level at which the flood height will spread, the speed with which to go, it is very bad for us.
Doesn't the height give it more power to produce more energy?
The height gives it more power. At the same time, you can still have a lower dam, which can also produce power, but not 1, 2 or 3 of them in cascade.
Instead of just, because there's a narrow gorge which they blocked to raise the level of water, which is over 30 meters. Your point is they could have cascaded it so that if one breaks, there will still be 2 more.
Of course. Or even this volume of water, it could have been stored in other downstream or upstream reservoirs. Not everything spill up at once.
Beautiful, but that's over 60 years old.
Yeah, there's nothing you can do about
But
that.
based on what we have now, Achampon did the Kpong Dam. Do you think we could have and should have done other dams further downstream to manage if there's a spillage or to spread more laterally the water?
Yeah, we could have done like what they are planning for Palugu. Palugu is upstream of the Akosombo. It could have also stored some of the water, but that has not yet come. Others could have come between Palugu and Akosombo, you see.
All these are viable.
They are all viable.
They wouldn't have been big as Akosombo, but they would have reduced the amount of inflow.
Of course, they could have reduced the amount of flow by storing some of the volume of water from upstream. Yeah.
Very interesting. And then finally, do you think there was a dredging solution? Because this morning, some people were talking about how if you go further down south, there could be some dredging done around the Anglo areas to allow more water to flow into the sea through more channels, because it looks like the rate at which the water goes into the sea is not also that quick, for which reason the water builds up from Mefe and all these places and causes the flooding. Is that viable in the circumstance?
Dredging of the outfall, let's say at Adan, the water enters the sea at Adan. There were some attempts to dredge the Adan estuary, but that, I don't know whether it has come on or it has materialized. But that could help a little bit by allowing more water to go into the sea, to be discharged into the sea. That possibility is also there, but that is not the main issue now.
I'll come to you later on how we can solve it, but let me take the legal angle to this. So viewers, as we've said, Prof started off with the history and also the general understanding of the responsibility of the VRA. Definitely thinks VRA have questions to answer. Engineer thinks that there are design issues there, and there are some engineering solutions. Clement, is this a legal issue?
So actually, I mean, it was interesting when Prof was speaking. I mean, first, let me also commiserate with the communities and hope that will all contribute to send relief to the communities affected. But interesting when Prof was speaking, spoke about this whole Volta Basin. Actually, there's a charter.
There's a charter?
There's a charter between Benin, Burkina Faso, Togo, Ghana, and Mali.
Yeah. Already?
Already.
Yeah,
now, this charter sets the framework. And permit me, let me read Article 61 of the charter to you. It says, states have a duty to thoroughly catalogue and chart potential flood hazards, vulnerabilities, and risk within areas susceptible to flooding in their territories.
Yeah.
2, document notable flood incidents in a database.
Wow.
Ensuring there's historical record of how these events were managed. And says states are entrusted with the responsibility of crafting and consistently maintaining an early warning system that relies on rain gauges and hydrometric station. There's an elaborate legal framework that regulates how we manage this water system. And the states through which these water systems go through have this charter already. So if you look at what has happened, you can clearly see a legal basis. The Volta River Authority, the development is set up by law. They have a primary function. They have a legislative instrument that regulates even flooding. So there are a number of things, but we need to also position this in things that are happening globally in relation to climate change and how human activity is affecting our environment. That now we are moving towards more sustainable living to ensure that we're able to reduce the rising temperatures to the dreaded 2.0. So there are certain things that maybe happened 10 years ago. The effect would have been not have been that bad as compared to what we are in today because of all these climate change vulnerabilities that we are seeing coming up within our system. So clearly, I would say that there are legal issues. The first legal issue for me is what is the function of the VRA in all this? Now, from a legal perspective also, we're looking at the communities affected. What rights, if any? Now, to be able to establish a legal right for these communities, you need to also find out whether or not VRA has breached a certain duty. I mean, in the area of general negligence, in the area of torts, we're also looking at balancing acts between private ownership of property as opposed to communal or national vital asset. Now, all these things will come into a cocktail that will determine what rights and what actions will need to be taken to protect the communities and also to protect this vital national asset.
Wow.
So, preliminary, I'll say that the law plays a very critical role in how we manage the dam because the setup of the area itself was done through legislation. Their functions is prescribed by legislation. And even also we have legislation on buffer zones and riverine communities, how close you should build. All these things are there. So when it comes to law, I always say that when it comes to law, in Ghana in particular, we don't lack. I think that issue has been enforcement. So you will see that a defense, possibly for VRA, will say, we gave you the early warning systems. We told you that this area is a buffer zone area for the river. You cannot build. People do not listen. They get their building permits. They build. So all these things will go in determining what rights, what laws have been breached, and what damages, if any, should accrue to.
This is a point of view, and we are basically looking at the situation in the Volta Basin below Akosombo, based on the flooding.
point.
No, I'll come back to you. I just want to do a summary. So tonight we're talking to Professor Georgie Chikata, who is a social scientist, and she's been researching on this. She's written a very good book on this. I urge you to get it, Living in the Shadow of the Large Dams. And Engineer Wise Ametepe is a hydrological engineer, engineering council, and of course, lawyer Clement Akapam giving us a legal perspective. When we come back, we'll take reactions across the three, and then also talk about future perspectives, right? How do we ensure that first we help as many people as we can, and then we avoid or prevent this type of thing in the future? Stay with us.
How do I cope with this heat?
By staying 5 degrees cooler.
Body odor is caused by germs, and on hot days, the sweating and the odor are more. That's why you need to get the new improved Dettol Cool Soap, which offers up to 5 degrees instant cooling sensation. This advert is...
Finally, anyone can become a household.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. You Go Flip, a real estate gaming platform that allows you to play and stand a chance of winning a house or cash or consolidated prizes, such as savings towards a house. Simple and easy to play. Visit www.yougoflip.com. Buy a ticket to enter the game. Wait for the end of the game to enjoy the win. Anyone can win. Flip it or own it. This advertisement has been vetted and approved by the Gaming Commission of Ghana. Play responsibly, not for persons below 18 years, and gaming can be addictive.
Welcome back. Tonight we're looking at the situation with the flooding in about 8 constituencies following the opening of the spillways. Indeed, on 15 September, the VRA started spilling. They said they started with 20,000 cubic feet per second, increased to 30, 40, 50. Now they're almost 200,000 cubic feet per second. I'm told that they can go as much as 1 million. The water in the dam, we're told, is over 1.5 billion cubic meters. That's a lot of water. I want to take comments from the panelists on what they've heard so far. So you commented on what Prof said, right, and he's commented on what the two of you have said. I'll take any comment from what you've said, and I'll come to Prof as well, if she can say anything before I go to my next question. Any quick reaction?
Yeah, I only want to stress on the point that he made earlier about the charter. No, the charter places emphasis on the individual members, individual member countries,
okay,
to take their own data into account in the management of their system. But the question we can ask here is that, is VRA able to take the charge of its own data? That's what we should find out. Are they taking charge of their data? Or are they the sole collectors of data from the river in Ghana?
What kind of data are we talking about? Is it just the level of the water? Does this include climatic data? Does this include human settlement data? What kind of data would VRA need to take?
We have flow data.
All right.
Then river level data. These are used to predict the oncoming flows. You know, VRA has a system already established by WRC, Water Research Commission. They brought in what we call flood early warning system. Every year, before the floods, they predict how much flow will come in and at what time the flow will come. These predictions are there yearly. They are there.
But Bernard, quick. So that's what the point I'm making is now these predictions are out of gauge because it's raining in October. It's out of gauge. So we should be in a position where we know that things are changing. So now we have to put in mechanisms to adapt to the changes that are happening in our system. Because yes, the data will be there, but it looks like there are outliers because things are not happening as normal as they used to be. Because of
Let me ask Prof a quick question. Prof, I've heard the VRA say that they were kind of misled by the weather prediction And they qualify that because they said to me in an interview that when the Meteo Agency had said that we're going to have a dry spell, apparently some El Nino phenomenon. So they didn't expect as much rain this year as they are having. And number two, in May, they did a flood simulation in about 6 of the districts. And they told people that it was possible there was going to be flooding. Prof. Georgie, does this in a way protect VRA? The 2 points I've just made.
Yeah, okay. Those are really good questions. And first of all, I want to thank our lawyer for providing some of the legal basis for thinking about responsibility in this business. First of all, to add to that, I want to say that dam builders and managers are legally responsible for all the effects of their actions and inactions on the river basin. The VRA is a state agency, and so the government of Ghana here also has legal responsibility. I think it's important not to make a false choice between the right to protect a national resource and the right to life and property. You can't choose between them. The legal position is that you are responsible for the lives and property that are affected in your effort to protect a national asset that you have put in a certain neighborhood. So I think this has to be clearly understood. And that said, if the VRA says that it did not have sufficient information, that could be taken into account, but it will not absolve it of responsibility, not at all. Secondly, the warnings, the simulations, and so on. I think that's a very important part of the responsibility of a dam builder, to undertake these exercises and to notify populations about what may happen. What I want to understand is, what else did it do? Is it enough to tell people that, hey, you're about to become flooded, so better jump to higher ground? What resources did they give people to be able to move? They're assuming that people have the money and additional resources to be able to change where they live in these hard times in Ghana, to be able, basically move into a classroom somewhere and hope that they can continue living there until when, I don't know. What I'm asking is that what resources did they offer to all these communities that are in trouble now?
What we know is
what
that...
kinds of warnings did they give?
What we know is that the shelters that have been provided were premeditated. So it wasn't as if when the flooding started in September and then they thought, so like when you go to St. Kizito, they knew that if the flooding gets to a certain level, they'll go to St. Kizito in Mepe. Yeah. If you go to, there's this place, I forget the name, in Asuchari that Umaru Sanda went to. There's a school that was designated. If you go to Adan community, there was a Methodist school that was designated already. So it appears to me that they knew that there would be shelters. But I think your question is still valid, because knowing that there's a shelter is one thing, but the ability to move there is an entirely different issue. So I'm not sure if that helps.
And the support you are being given to move. And in any case, even if people move to higher ground, they can't move immovable property. So VRA has to take responsibility for all the buildings that have been destroyed. You can't claim that people should have moved their immovable property to higher ground. And I take the point about people building in flood zones, people not having permits and so on. But if our own state agencies give people permits to build in these places, there's an added complication there. So I think it will be very difficult for the VRA and the government to basically evade legal responsibility for the loss and damage.
Let me come to Clement. Thank you. She refers to it as a false choice, and I struggle with that in a sense, because my legal question is the balance between the managing a national resource in a way that inures to our general benefit versus the right to life and property. She says the two cannot be, we shouldn't make it an either or. Yeah. But in the event of a natural disaster, that could be an either or. So for example, if the dam were to break and you have 1.5 billion cubic feet of water flowing, that's going to be a bigger situation.
Of course.
So could they say that if a natural incident leads to the possibility of a dam breaking, we will spill 1 million to save the livelihoods of 3 million people. Do you get my point? So is there a point in which this becomes a choice they have to make, or this is premature?
No, I mean, Bernard, all the rights we have enshrined under the 1992 Constitution are subject to public interest. So clearly, if you look at your Article 12 of the 1992 Constitution, it will state that your rights are subject to public interest. So if the VRA's position is that it's in the public interest to spill that amount of water to save the dam, because it's a national asset, then when it gets to the point of culpability, VRA can take cover under this provision to say that we acted in the larger public interest as against, but then it raises the question, the spillage, was it the damage that was occasioned, was it foreseeable? So that if it was foreseeable, then the VRA was supposed to also take certain steps to abate or reduce. So it is these two things will now come together to establish what we'll call a duty of care, or that standard. And if you look at a number of the case law will clearly state that before you can say that someone has a duty of care and has breached that duty, we will need to look at a number of things. The first thing is, was that act likely to cause injury? And was that injury foreseeable? That's the first thing we need to cross. The second thing is the magnitude and seriousness of the injury and the risk. So if, yes, it will cause injury, it's not enough. We now need to find what was the magnitude. Is it something that could have been abated or assuaged in any way? Now, the third and most important point is the social value of the activity. So if the activity being undertaken has a greater social value, then the standard of care expected is lowered. Because then that activity is inuring to the benefit of a larger social value. Then finally is compliance with general safety protocols. Now we're told that they have their emergency plans, they had their environmental strategies in place on how to deal with all these things. We now need to interrogate how effective they complied with these prescriptions. It is the addition or summation of these points that will lead us to place responsibility. Now, I hear Prof clearly when she says that, yes, people cannot move their property, and that once it's immovable property and it's caused damage, the VRA and by extension the state is liable for it. Yes, that's understandable. However, that will need to be interrogated further. Is this property within the foreseeable limit of the damage? Is this property supposed to be where it is? These are the things that will go into determining the breach. Now, the last point I will make is that what is VRA's duty? Is it to inform? Is it to evacuate? Is it to provide resources to evacuate? What exactly
Let me
is
read a
VRA's
story
duty?
on their website, which I'll take your comment on because it helps us. So if you go to the VRA website under their news publications, this story was written, I think, in May 2023. VRA achieves great success with exercise Dawohunsu 2023. And it's just 3 paragraphs, so permit me to read it. My people will put it up. As part of efforts to test emergency preparedness plans, EPP, the Water Review Authority, in collaboration with the National Disaster Management Authority, NADMO organization, have undertaken a flood simulation exercise dubbed VRA EPP Exercise Dawohunsu 23. It was undertaken in 3 of the 9 districts likely to be impacted following the operationalization of the Akosombo and Dam dams, witnessed a seamless collaboration and coordination among state agencies, including the National Ambulance Service, Ghana National Fire Service, Ghana Police Service, National Signals Bureau, Ghana Army, Ghana Navy, and the Marine Police, with support from the U.S. Embassy and the North Dakota National Guard. This is their own story. The simulation exercise, which took place at Asuojaman North Tong, and Adan East districts, which is essentially the three most hardest hit of the Eastern Volta and Greater Accra regions, had the main objective of testing VRA's notification systems and the concomitant response by the participating agencies, including the Ghana Police Service, National Ambulance Service, Ghana National Fire Service, Ghana Navy, Marine Police, etc. The exercise involved total voluntary and compulsory evacuations and search and rescue. End of story. There are 3 photographs of a group photograph, some military men on a boat, and some attempted rescue. So, can you say a simulation exercise is successful when it is done, or you can only say it is successful after it is tested by what is happening now, engineer?
I think simulation exercise is after it has been tested. Now we are doing the testing. Yeah.
So they can't call it a success?
No, it can't be, because first of all, to what extent were they expecting the emergency? We are not told. To what extent? That would have gone into the simulation. To what extent? Then they would have asked people to move away, evacuate themselves from certain locations to other places, safe havens. So it means that was not even exhaustive. That simulation exercise was not very exhaustive, because they didn't know to what extent the spillage or the disaster will come this time. If they had known, it would have gone further than that.
They did 3 districts, and now we have about 9 districts affected.
Yeah, I think that's it.
But let me, Prof, just quickly, you are a social scientist. Does a simulation have to involve all the possible? Because this, you can say this story is a bit self-incriminating. Yes. This is on their website. They say they did 3, and they say it was highly successful. And this is May 2023.
And that's a very good question, because could representatives of all the districts that could have been affected have been invited to join? But I still maintain that we should not be asking the people of the lower Volta to continue subsidizing the power system in Ghana. The lawyer was saying that, is it the duty of the VRA to evacuate? I think it's the duty of somebody, the Ghana government, whoever is concerned with the safety of the dam, to do this evacuation and to pay for it, and not ask citizens who suffered for 50 years to continue to subsidize dam production. I think they've suffered enough, and we should stop this business of treating them like basically people are just doing good corporate social responsibility. So I applaud City for its efforts to support the communities. That's good social corporate social responsibility. But what the VRA does cannot be corporate social responsibility. It is the builder and the manager of a large dam. So it has more responsibilities than somebody who's a bystander. And secondly, just to go back to my point about a false choice, I agree that at a certain point in time, obviously, water has to be spilled because it's too late. But if you take your analysis from that point, I think you are making a mistake. And that's why the questions that our panelists have been asking about, when did the VRA know that the rains were going to be bad? Did it really manage its planning around this spillage as well as it could? Are particularly interesting, because if you know that the people in the lower Volta are as important as the dam, or that the economy and the social systems in the Volta Basin are as important as the dam, you will not treat them as a result that you can either avoid or not avoid. You will do all in your power to make sure that it doesn't get to this. And that's the point I was making about the false choice. That if we wait until it's too late and we have to spill, whether we like it or not, we cannot then be claiming that, oh, there was nothing we could do, and that actually the dam is about to burst its banks, and that if it does, all of Ghana will be flooded. That's no excuse. I think when you get to that point, you are really discussing failure and how to mitigate that failure. And I'm saying that this is a problem.
All right, we'll take a breather and come and wrap up. I need 2 questions answered. Is there any example somewhere we can learn from in mitigating the suffering of the people? And what do we need to do now to prevent such a thing ever happening again? Those are the two questions we'll answer when we come back. Stay with us.
How do I cope with this heat?
By staying 5 degrees cooler.
Body odor is caused by germs, and on hot days, the sweating and the odor are more. That's why you need to get the new improved Dettol Cool Soap, which offers up to 5 degrees instant cooling sensation.
This advert is...
Welcome back tonight. We're still on the spillage in the Volta Lake and its effect on 9 or 10 communities. Don't forget, we are raising support, food, water, blankets, mattresses, and money. We'll put something on the screen later on for you to see how you can support us. And our team has been working on the ground to find out the situation, and hopefully we can support people immediately. So I have two questions. Prof, let's have a Prof. You've studied these things extensively. Globally, how does this compare to what's happening elsewhere? And also, what can we do, or what should we be doing now to ensure that this is the last time we have this kind of situation in Ghana?
Thank you for that question. I wish I could give you good examples, but actually the record of dam builders has been very poor in relation to dam-affected communities. In 2000, the World Commission on Dams, which was set up by the IUCN and the World Bank, basically concluded that while dams have made an important and significant contribution to human development and the benefits derived from them have been considerable, in too many cases, these are the words of the Commission, an unacceptable and often unnecessary price has been paid to secure those benefits, especially in social and environmental terms, by people displaced, by communities downstream, by taxpayers, and by the natural environment. Now, this was a situation in 2000, and the Commission set up some really good guidelines for the future behavior of dam builders and dam building institutions. And it talked, for example, about providing entitlements to affected communities to improve their livelihoods and ensure that they receive the priority share of project benefits beyond compensation for their losses. It talked about the fact that affected communities include people living downstream and those affected by dam-related infrastructure such as transmission lines and irrigation canals. As soon as that report came out, the dam building industry, which is a very powerful industry, started condemning this report, such that the World Bank, which commissioned the report, said that, oh, actually, these are only guidelines, so they are not binding on anybody anymore. I really believe that the answer to many of our challenges lie in that report. And I would commend it to the VRA and the government of Ghana. Actually, the VRA was involved in the World Commission on Dams. Mr. Kalichi wrote one of the reports that was the World Commission on Dams based its findings. So I would say that go back. There's nothing wrong with going back to pick up what you left, which is good. Pay attention to the recommendations about how to manage dams and take it forward. Secondly, there have been recent studies saying that contrary to this idea that large dams actually help with flood management, they've been responsible for increases in floods in various countries. There's a study on the Yellow River in China which has proved this. And it's basically making recommendations about the ways in which the redesign of dams could mitigate some of these things. So I really think that this is a time for introspection. It is a time that we've been given, an opportunity we've been given to make fundamental changes in the ways in which we've managed the Volta River project. I also believe that since the VRA has proven to be singularly unable to manage the rest of the Volta Basin beyond these dams, maybe we need a new institution which is granted the resources from power generation and from the whole energy sector, is funded by the energy sector to manage the rest of the basin and to make sure that it holds the Volta River Authority and the Bui Dam Authority and all the dam builders to account, but also that it addresses the challenges all the way from the upstream communities to the lakeside communities to the downstream communities, and also actually looks at the business communities around the Volta Basin. Because it's not just communities that have been affected. There are all sorts of businesses around the Volta Basin. The fish farms, the hospitality businesses, they are all in trouble at the moment. And really we need a new structure for the management of the Volta Basin.
Wonderful. Thank you, Prof. Engineer, from an engineering hydrological perspective, what can we do now to mitigate suffering and to prevent this from reoccurring?
First of all, let me look at the reoccurring. I would suggest that we, from now on in the design sector, we should begin to look at the mini hydros, the smaller hydros, not the very large ones, which could cause a lot of, the large ones could cause a lot of problems, but the mini ones cannot cause problems. And there are quite a number of rivers in the country which we can look at. You see, lot of countries are now coming out of large dams. They are going for mini hydros, which can also give you equal power when you sum them up. Then secondly, I also want them to, at least this time, they should look at communities that have been affected, to what extent they have been affected. And then now in the resettling of the people, when people are coming back, people should not be allowed to come back to areas which have got higher flows. They should enforce the coming back so that people do not come back to the same point where flood has occurred. Maybe earlier on, they were to look at, what do we call it, buffer zones. Maybe the buffer zones they've given, this flood has exceeded those buffer zones. So what do they do? Now take new records of what you've seen and make sure people do not come below those buffer zones. And then thirdly, I would also like them to begin to look at the data collection system. If they have got proper data, maybe they will have started spilling earlier to create volume, to space for the mass of water coming to be stored. Maybe they didn't start early, they started very late because lack of data to be able to know what will happen. Yeah, so these are the
Those are some of the points.
Yeah.
Clement, I have a last but one question for you. Do you foresee suits? Because I've had people call me on the show to say to me that they really want to take the VRA on. Some are talking about class actions.
Right.
Do you see, is there any precedent in Ghana legally on such a thing? And where do you see this going?
I mean, so if you talk about class actions, there are a number of them. I mean, the squatters at Agboboloshi was one famous one. Definitely, people want to test the law with what has happened. I will say that in the immediate, we should treat this as a humanitarian incident, address it, and then look at putting in place a system that will respond to the fundamental changes we want to see. An integrated dam management system that takes into account the livelihoods of the persons living along the dam or downstream, their activities, and how that management is done. And I hear Prof saying that it looks like VRA, the capacity to do that does not exist.
Yeah.
Can we, and this will require certain legislative change. And that's for me in the long term. But in the short term, people want to test the law. And in testing the law, you'll be coming against a very strong also defense in the areas of general negligence in the areas of torts, where clearly some of the hurdles you need to clear are the points we've made about the societal value point of what the activity seeks to achieve. But lastly, I think that after this incident, we need to take our land use and spatial planning around our rivers very important. Bernard, there was this river in East Legon. Right now, it doesn't exist. Lake Tessa.
It doesn't exist anymore.
It doesn't exist. Where? Totally.
Wow. A whole river.
It's gone.
That new road they did on the boundary road extension.
And this Lake Tessa, in my formative years in the law, this was what my senior used to help us to understand environmental law. It's no longer there.
It's gone.
It's gone. And I'm saying that our land use and spatial planning authority needs to be up and doing when it comes to our river banks and what we are allowed to do, what type of structures you're even allowed to. Yes, you can come have some livelihood, not permanent, very temporal structures that can be moved, all those things. But this will require some change in our legislative architecture to be able to stop some of these things from happening in the near future.
Thank you. Before we go, let me just say that we have a campaign ongoing. So while we analyze the history, we prescribe solutions, we're also immediately trying to help, because it appears it's going to be for the long haul. The levels are still rising and more spilling is being done. People have been affected in at least 8 or 9 districts, all the way from Sojaman to even Ketu South. Because there's Sojaman, there's Shai Osudoku, there's the 3 tongues, North, Central, and then South. Then there's Adan East, and then you have Anglon, Keta, and Ketu South. So relief support campaign is ongoing. Send us mobile money. We also want water. We even want water treatment pellets to help some of the communities, sachet or bottled water, canned food or bagged food, mattresses, blankets, utensils, even sanitary pads for some of the people. So it's a humanitarian situation, and we have been following this throughout. So you can send mobile money to us. We're hitting parts of the flooded areas tomorrow, all through the weekend. We'll bring you a report on this. I want to thank the companies that have donated so far, and we want to urge you to donate as well. Let me thank my panelists, Professor Joji Chikata. She's giving me a crash program in dam understanding. She loaded too many things to read. Too many things. Prof, thank you for all the things you said, plus your book. If you want to understand the situation, get this book. It's a really good book. It's a good read. You don't have to start from chapter 1. You can just jump into the middle and understand. Engineer Wise Ametefe is, everybody I spoke to from Engineering Council says this is the guy to talk to. Hydrological engineer with a lot of experience on dam issues. Clement Akapam is a lecturer at GIMPA, but he also is the country principal for Client Earth, who are, you can call them natural resource advocates. Thank you for watching. Stay with City TV. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.